I would never buy these 3 types of UK property. And that might surprise you, because one of them is marketed to overseas investors every single day. Another can be incredibly difficult to sell. And the third is so controversial that some property investors will completely disagree with me. Now, that doesn't mean nobody should ever buy them, but after more than a decade investing in UK property, I've seen investors lose thousands of pounds buying properties that looked fantastic on paper, but turned out to be disappointing investments. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 types of UK property I personally avoid, explain the hidden risks behind each one, and reveal the rare situations where they can actually make sense. Because avoiding one bad investment can save you far more money than finding one good investment. And the first property on this list is probably the most heavily marketed property type in the entire UK property industry. Let's start there. Imagine you're sitting in Singapore or Hong Kong or Australia. You see an advert for a brand new UK apartment. The photos look incredible. The building looks modern. The brochure looks professional. Then you see the magic words, guaranteed rent. Suddenly it feels safe, predictable, passive, almost risk-free. And that's exactly why I generally avoid these types of investments. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying all new build properties are bad. I'm not saying every guaranteed rent scheme is a scam, but I am saying that the guaranteed rent is often the least important part of the investment. Because what happens when the guarantee ends? That's the question many investors never ask. I've seen investors become so focused on the guaranteed income that they ignore the things that actually determine long-term performance. The true market value, the service charges, the ground rent, the actual rent demand, and the resale market. In some cases, investors pay a premium for a property because the guaranteed rent makes the numbers look attractive. But 2 or 3 years later, when the guarantee expires, reality starts to appear. Now, the real rental market takes over. Now, the true service charges matter. Now, the resale value matters. And sometimes those numbers don't look nearly as attractive. If I was considering one of these investments, I would completely ignore the guaranteed rent. And I'd ask myself, would I still buy this property if the guarantee didn't exist? If the answer is no, I walk away. Because the investment should stand on its own 2 feet, not on a temporary promise. Now, at least with these properties, you're usually buying a conventional apartment that most people understand. The next property creates a completely different problem, getting out. A few years ago, an investor contacted me. He owned 2 student pods, and he wasn't calling because he wanted to buy more. He was calling because he wanted to sell them. The problem was finding anybody who actually wanted them. Now, if you've never come across student pods before, they're often marketed as hands-off investments, strong yields, professional management, student demand, sometimes even guaranteed rent. On paper, they can look fantastic, but here's the problem. Investors aren't judged on the day you buy them. They're judged on the day you try to sell them. And that's where many investors discover the issue. When you buy a traditional house or flat, there are usually multiple potential buyer groups. Investors, homeowners, first-time buyers, families. But when you buy a student pod, your buyer pool becomes much smaller. Many investors don't want them, many lenders won't finance them, and owner-occupiers can't live in them. So when the time comes to sell, you may discover that demand isn't nearly as strong as it looked when you bought it. Then add in potentially high service charges, management fees, and restrictions, and the investment starts looking very different. This is why I always ask one simple question before buying any property. Not just, why would I buy this? But why would somebody buy it from me in 5 years' time? Because buying is easy. Selling is where the market tells the truth. Now, the third property on the list is probably the one that surprises people the most, because millions of people own them. And despite that, I still generally avoid them. Now, this one will probably upset some people because leasehold properties are everywhere. And whenever I say I generally prefer freeholds, people immediately assume I hate leaseholds. I don't. But whenever possible, I prefer freehold property. The reason is simple: control. With leasehold property, you're introducing additional layers of complexity: service charges, ground rent, managing agents, lease lengths, future costs, future uncertainty. And here's where many investors get caught out. They focus on the property, the kitchen, the bathroom, the rental income, but they don't pay enough attention to the lease itself. And that can become expensive, especially when the lease starts getting shorter. Now, here's where it gets interesting. One of the most interesting deals I've ever helped a client buy was actually a leasehold property. The lease had just 57 years remaining. Most investors ran away. We didn't. We negotiated a purchase price of £37,000 and the lease extension cost just over £6,000. The lease was extended to 999 years, and the ground rent became a peppercorn rent. And today, the property rents for just under £500 per month. The lesson? The lease wasn't the problem. The problem would have been buying it without understanding it. That's why I generally avoid leaseholds. Not because they're always bad, but because many investors don't fully understand what they're buying. And if you don't understand the lease, the service charges, the future liabilities, or the cost of extending the lease, you're introducing risk that may not be obvious on day one. So what do these three types of properties all have in common? They're often sold using what investors want to hear: guaranteed rent, high yields, low entry prices, passive income. But the biggest property mistakes don't happen because people buy bad properties. They happen because people buy properties they don't fully understand. The guarantee that ends, the resale market that doesn't exist, the lease that nobody bothered to read. And that's why every time I look at a potential investment, I ask myself one simple question: why shouldn't I buy this? Because the answer to that question has saved me far more money than any property I've ever purchased. If you've invested in UK property before, I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you ever considered buying one of these property types, or do you completely disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're investing in UK property from overseas and want to avoid costly mistakes, make sure you subscribe and check out the resources linked below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.